Hey everybody! How we all doing? It's beautiful Wednesday. Hope you're all ready for some environment art feedback because we've got a whole bunch of people to get through today. Make sure that we get Discord up as well. It's Populus and the apples. How are you both doing? Thank you so much for submitting your work for the stream. NPC Liam is here. Hi, NPC. Damn, that's some immersive dialogue that you have going on there. Doing good over here. Thank you so much. Jesse's here as well. Happy to have you all here. Make sure that our little pen is set up and ready to go. Okay. Yeah, I'm doing good. Did a bunch of work on one of the environments that we're working on today. But it's time for some feedback. So I'm making a slight change. It's a little bit last minute, but I noticed that a couple of people didn't really ask for any specific feedback. And if that doesn't happen, then I'm kind of gonna skip it. Like, we're still gonna go look over the art, right? Like, I still want to include it in the stream. But I'm probably not gonna linger on it too much. So for the next ones, if you want it to be included, make sure to ask like a couple of specific questions, right? That makes my life easier as well. And helps you grow way more specifically too. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I'll put that in the message as well on our Discord, so that you know that that is happening. Yeah, but that's all the stuff that I wanted to say. Just as like a little bit of a change to the quote-unquote format. Yeah, but let's dive in. No particular order. I don't really know in what order I kind of dragged them in. Kind of random, I guess. So let's... Oh, wait. Wait, hold up. Did Anchor just remove, like, his work? Okay. Oh, no. No, it's here. Sorry. My bad. Okay, so first up. Anchor is starting this new project. I've made some changes to the concept. Replaced the house with the blacksmith's house. Pretty much done with the modeling, starting the texturing. Can you please give feedback on the composition and also some suggestions for texturing? Like, how do I approach it? Okay. There's a couple of questions that follow up on that, but I'm going to start out with the composition. Hi, Anchor. Good to see you here as well. So I would say, like, if you're following this composition, right? Oh, wait. I didn't grab the most important screenshot. Oh. Yeah, so the most important screenshot, I didn't grab that, so let me quickly do that. I'm probably just gonna paste it over this guy over here. Okay, so because you are taking the composition from the concept already, right? So I think the composition mainly is good. There are a couple of things that I want to point out though. Is if we look at the concept, it's not only the placement of the house that's really important, right? But also the silhouette. So you notice that there is this like really tall spire over here, which compared to all the rest in the scene, apart from like the sides, right? Like the sides of the scene, like this is the tallest thing that has the most that is most in the foreground, right? Because you have the tall building, like the tall mountains in the back, but they don't really count because they're so far and they kind of blend in with the atmosphere of the thing, right? And that's the main thing that's missing here, right? So what I would do is you got two options, right? Like either scale the building up a little bit, or make the mountains in the background, well, do two things, right? Like more atmospherics. So more atmosphere. Because what you're trying to do from, like, if we just look at the values and the color values, right? Like, we're trying to separate this value, like this gray, from like this other gray in the background. So there's a couple of ways to do that. Like one would be either to do it with more atmosphere, so we're even blurring or like diffusing the background even more. Two, we could actually increase the foreground element, right? So one of the things that you'll see here is, if you look at the entire concept, is that a lot of it is really green, and then you have the red tiles from the roof that kind of create like this really interesting complementary color, right? So that's something that I would probably look into, is just replace this, like the roof, with red bricks for color separation. You can do both, right? Like these, you can do both at the same time if you wanted to. And then also like increase the silhouette. Oh man, still haven't figured out how to write this, but here we go. Yeah, I would apply those three things to especially the large, like the large shapes of the house, right? You want it to really stand apart from like the background. But overall, the composition is pretty good, right? Pay attention to curves and to guiding lines. You see what I'm doing here? Like this curve, really nice. This curve, also pretty nice. And you kind of have like a good curve going on here, right? I would probably push this tree down a little bit, but this curve is completely gone. You've kind of built a wall here, right? So what you can do instead is purely thinking about volumes, right? Like have trees that kind of have the same stepping effect as in your concept. Because you're trying to replicate like this kind of feeling as well, right? So you have the trees doing that, but you also have like the mountain in the background doing that again in like the distant layer too. So you have the foreground, and then you have the background layer also kind of subtly pushing you in too. Same is happening here, right? You have like all the foreground shapes with the trees. They kind of push you towards that direction as well, but then you also have like the background shape, just kind of pushing you towards the middle. So there's a lot of lines that are kind of swooping in towards the middle. Whereas in your case, like you have the foreground line on the left, right? Like this one is quite good. But then the background kind of gets lost. Like the background in your case is mostly flat. Especially from this part on, right? So I would really focus on that, like the leading lines. Right, because this one is getting there. It's just the rest of it that doesn't have the same kind of feeling to it yet. Oh, just as like an in-between. If you're new to this live stream, feel free to call out anything that doesn't make sense, right? Or like if you're like, hey, look, this word, I don't know what that word means. Feel free to shout anything out, right? As you're seeing it. Yes, I have to change those mountains. I have put those just in for blockout. Even in a blockout stage, right? Even in a blockout, the composition needs to be right. You could even have no textures on those mountains at all, and it still needs to be it kind of needs to, that's why we do blockouts, right? It's exactly this. It's to get the composition right and to get like the fundamentals of the scene in a good position. So yeah, I know what you're saying, right? Like you kind of threw them in quick, but even in that case, like try to keep the composition in mind already. And then you can still change it later on, right? That's totally fine. So yeah. So in the grand scheme of things, right? Like if I draw like a little composition thingy here, what we're trying to do with like, I'm thinking about pure shapes, right? It's like we're trying to have like a big shape here, which is like probably like a little bit more offset, right? So we have like the big shape here. That's our focal point. And then we have curves that kind of lead us towards that focal point, right? Like that's the same for the river, right? The river is kind of doing the same thing as well. Like everything is kind of pointing towards that thing. Because even if you follow the river, right, you go around this curve, like there's this blocker that's pulling you towards this side more. So I try to simplify this as much as possible, right? Where you literally need to look at it as like blocks and lines. That's all we're working with really with a composition. Yeah. Nice one. Yeah, I like the choice of the composition, right? And then also how you're gonna change it up. I would definitely like make use of like the height of this and like make it way bigger than it's supposed to be. Yeah. That's it on the composition side, right? So you had a couple of questions as well when it comes to the texturing too. The first one is, how do I add dirt on the tileable wall textures? A simple way to do that, there's a couple of ways, right? But I'm gonna say the simple one. So, wait, number one is adding dirt to tileables. Right? So, there's a couple of options here. I would say vertex paint is the easiest one. I would honestly, for this kind of stuff, I would probably just look into vertex paint. Yeah, honestly, for this sort of stuff, like you don't need that much more. Just look into vertex paint. I'm gonna keep it there. Like all the other options that I was gonna talk about were gonna be like more technical and probably not that useful for if you're just doing like a unique house. So I would stick with vertex paint for this one, personally. In vertex paint, the way that you set that up is basically it allows you to paint and blend between two materials that you set up, right? So you would have your base wall, and then you would have your second layer in like your dirt, for example, and then you would blend between them using preferably like a height lerp. That's the, if you're just blending like one layer, right, like a height lerp, it's gonna help you out here. Or or there's also like a material height blend that you can do as well, I think. Yeah, what the height lerp does is it allows you to blend between two different textures based on a height map. So it will take into account like the different heights of the textures to do the blending as well, giving you like a really nice blend. Cool. And number 2, which part should be unique? Well, which part should be unique, right? So let's add the question here. Unique. What I would do is take unique stuff where, or like make unique stuff where you want to add details, right? So an example could be this thing, right? Like this banner, be unique. The barrels could potentially be unique, right? But like with a barrel, you can also use trim sheets. And if you make one barrel, you can just rotate it and make like a couple of barrels, right? So that's like reusability again. The shields, I would try to make them unique. Some of these signage, I would definitely make unique as well. But the rest of it, yeah, I would try to do as much with a trim sheet or something like that as possible. Can you please send me any link of vertex paint tutorials using height lerps? There's probably enough of them on YouTube, honestly. Like if you just type in like Unreal Engine vertex paint, you're gonna find like a bunch of tutorials on it. Yeah, so that's what I would do, right? Like any signage or any prop that you want to look really good up close, right? That's where I would spend like my unique time. The rest of it, if it's seen from a distance, like don't care. Try to make it with a trim sheet or anything like that, right? Yeah, so up close, or like if you can't make them with other textures, then I would make them unique as well. Also, as a small tip on the side, don't try to make all of this, right? Like keep in mind like the distance where you'd be looking at stuff, right? So if this is the only, let's say this is the only camera viewpoint that you have, you don't need to make a whole bunch of stuff unique because you're only going to see it from a distance anyway, right? If you then want to do additional zoomed in shots and you want to get really close to stuff, yeah, you'll have to put in like a little bit more time to make them look good as well. But yeah, you don't necessarily need to. That's what I'm trying to say. And then number 3, the environment is huge. Should I work on the smaller details like sculpting a blank silhouette in ZBrush? No, the way that I would approach this is to break this up into as many reusable pieces that you can, right? So yeah, so okay, let's continue the color coding, right? So like all the red stuff is unique. If we then pick the green stuff, like that's gonna be tideable, right? So like the roof is a great example of what can be like a tideable texture. And if you then want to get like a gradient, right? You can do that with vertex paint as well. Instead of blending between 2 layers, you just have like a darker version, or you just like overlay like a darker color on top of it, and that allows you to blend between the 2 using vertex paint. So let's see. Honestly, like all this stonework as well, that can also be just like tideable stuff, right? Like all this stuff can all be tidables. Right, so the roof itself is just going to be One tileable. Another tip, if you want to create like additional character with a tileable, right? Like if you have like a tileable texture like this, cut around one of the wooden planks and just add a little bit of geometry to like either push it up a little bit or like rotate it slightly. You can do a lot with a tileable by just cutting around like the shapes of the tileable itself and then just rotating it just a little bit, or like, I don't know, even cutting it out, right? Like could be a good way to create like a hole in like a tileable texture, for example. So green is tileable. Red is unique. And then we have blue. Well, honestly, like the tileable could also, like the wood on the floor, could also be tileable as well. Like this stone on the side, that could also be a tileable. Right, and then all the stuff here that's like in between like all the wood, that's also tileable to me. Just like large surfaces, we can just make that out of a tileable as well. Like all this plaster work, it's gonna be a tileable. Right, and then basically all that remains, like I'll do it with like a bright purple or something like that. All that remains will be a trim sheet. Right? So, and what a trim sheet is basically a texture that has like little trims of like wooden planks on it. So let's say if this is like your texture, right? It would have like little sections, like little strips of like wooden planks, and they would just continue horizontally, so you can map like really long beams on it if you wanted to. And then you could also include like the ends of the wooden beams on here too. And then map, you could map like an entire beam on here, right? So let's say that's our beam. You would have like these two over there, and then number 2 is on the edge. And with this entire kit, you can make like really organic shapes. So like all this stuff, right? Like all the woodwork, that's all just a trim sheet. All of it. So like you would have like little bits of trim, and then the roof itself is a tileable. But like the rest is just all trim. So like all this stuff on the chimney, all the woodwork, like all this kind of stuff. Like the door in its entirety. I mean, I can keep going, right? So like this thing on the silhouette, that's also a trim sheet. These fences, that's also a trim sheet. And that's how I would break it up. I'll give you an example. I know we're running pretty long as well here, but these are some fundamental questions, so it's probably good to stay on them for a little bit longer. Hey Aladdin! I'm doing good, thank you so much. So let me show you an example of what I mean with trim sheets from my own scene that I'm working on, right? Like all the woodwork here, like is also a trim sheet. Like it's literally just like the same wooden trim sheet, like just applied in different ways. Like all the wood, like this cart that you see in the foreground, right? Like this cart over here. That's also made out of the same trim sheet as like the buildings are. Like they're really versatile. If you wanna check it out, like we actually have like a pretty good resource on this as well. Let me just go to our website so that you can check that out too. Trim sheets. There we go. Link that in the chat. Yep, that's the resource that basically explains what trim sheets are, how to set them up, how to prepare them, like all that kind of stuff, right? But that's how I would break up like this entire building. It's gonna take you a little bit to get used to it because it is like a different workflow, but that's how you build things like out of scale, like at this scale, and like still have them look really good. And that's how I would break up like the entire building here. Let's see. Yep. That's how I would break it up. And that's question number 3 as well. So this was probably a lot to take in, right? I basically gave you like a whole bunch of things to look into. Take your time. Don't worry. What I'll also say, looking at this environment, focus on the building, ignore the rest. Because the building is the most important part. So just ignore the grass, ignore the landscape, ignore the mountains. Just focus on making this building look good and understanding like all these different workflows before thinking about like all the rest of the environment. Because the building is going to be like the most difficult part to get right with all these workflows that I just mentioned, right? So try to get that done first, because if you for some reason can't figure out how to do it, then that's what the entire environment was about, right? Do I need to scale the house? Not necessarily. Like, that's what we talked about here, right? Like, you can either scale the house up or you can push the mountains down as well. Like, there's always multiple creative solutions to these problems. So you could do either or in that case. Got it. Awesome. Yeah, that will give you a lot to work with. So, good luck with that. If there's any other questions, just let us know in the community chat. I'll also put this image, like I'm gonna put that in your thread, right? So that you can easily refer to it. I'm gonna do that after the stream as well. So I'm gonna post that up. A little evil Tim laugh always gets me. The evil Tim laugh. Alright, cool. Yeah, thank you so much for putting up your work, Anchor. And yeah. Interesting choice of concept. I like the way that you're approaching this, right? Like, taking two interesting things and bashing them together into like a new thing. Just be careful that you don't overscope, right? Because that's always a tricky part. But yeah, good luck, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this in the future. Awesome! And then we're gonna move straight on to Populus. Gotta say, really like the water. It's really serene. Yeah, I like it too. I think, yeah, this is a great concept as well to base it on. Just the colors and like the composition and all that stuff is really on point in this one, so great foundation to build it on. Anyways, next up we got Populus. Let's have a look. Rather small update this time. Nothing special this time around, just if anything needs any improvement or if I messed something up. Also curious what you think about the plank on the waterfall, if it looks okay or nope. That's gonna be an easy one. I don't think it looks good at all. The reason why is because it is just one solid plank, right? But it doesn't have like the normal dimensions of a plank, so it's kind of weird. It's kind of in a weird spot where it kind of looks like a plank, but it is so big that it doesn't really make sense, right? Like, there's a couple of ways again to solve this, right? Like, either break it up into like multiple planks, and then maybe have like, I don't know, planks like this that kind of help with the whole idea, right? Or maybe have like a little drawbridge situation where you could imagine that someone like lowered it down, because that's the intent here probably, right? But I don't think it works as is. Also because you gotta look at the grand scheme of things, right? Like, these are nice individual planks. The planks on the door are also individual, I think. I don't think I have a close-up here. But like, for example, these planks as well. All individual, and then you have like this giant plank here. Right? So I would just use these planks from the same dimension and just build something with those planks, right? Like, well, what you would normally have, I think, is... let's think, right? I was looking at this for the watermill. Like, you would probably have something like this, right? So this is from the top down. This is like your main board, right? That has like a handle on top of it. So you can like pull it out of the water. And then you put that in between like two sections of a wall like this. Right? And that's kind of how that would work. So from the front, it would kind of look like something like this, right? And then this is built out of multiple planks, kind of held together as well. And then this would be like the actual dam, and this is where the water comes out, right? So this is like the water level. I would definitely have a look at Ref, right? Ref is going to really help you out. And then, yeah, you have all the components here, right? So might as well make use of them. Yeah. I mean, definitely could use with a little bit more blending here, right? But other than that, decent. I would say depends what you want to go for, right? Because your stones are like a little bit more complex when it comes to the base color. So they have like a little bit of like textural complexity to it, where the planks, they don't really have that same complexity at the moment. So the texture kind of feels flat compared to some of the other stuff here, right? And then also, let's have a look. If that is using a trim sheet, might be worth investing like more geometry on the edges. And if it's unique, then yeah, do the same thing, but bake it down from like a nice high poly then, right? Let's actually have a look. So little wooden props using a trim sheet. So it is a trim sheet. Okay. I would definitely like invest a little bit more geometry there, right? Give it like a little bit more of a shape. Well, yeah. I'll keep it to this for now. I think I like what you're doing with the tower. I think you can even keep the bottom of the tower like we discussed last time, like just full stone, right? But I like what you're doing with the tower in general, where you have like these patches where the stonework is kind of peeking through. I like that. And then also, this is a minor point, like, be careful for stretching here. Like, it kind of feels like you took, like, just a circle, right? And then just stretched it out. And you can kind of feel that in the geometry as well. And whenever you feel that, that means that you kind of need to readjust it to kind of make like a nice curve again. Right? Instead of, like, the stretched out one that you kind of have right now. Make it look nice. I was thinking, should I do detailing for the tower in bricks completely, or should I add little wooden details in it as well? I mean, the stuff that you have going on now is good enough, right? I think what you probably want to do is think about how these things interact with each other, right? Because I would almost be inclined to kind of have like lots of plaster around the wood and then reveal like in between, right? But not reveal it like around the wood. And I would just think about how those two interact, right? Because the reason why I'm saying that is because the wood itself poking out from stones looks weird to me. So you can kind of just clean that up with the vertex painting that you have set up. Yeah, try it. Block it out, see if it works. If it doesn't, cut it out. Sometimes you just have to have fun, right? Have fun and experiment. The whole bridge is being reworked, sort of. I'm doing the topology properly now, and the UVs as well. Oh, that's awesome. Awesome. Yeah, cool. Thanks for sharing your work again, Populus. Appreciate that. Got it. Thanks, mate. No worries. Happy to help. And then we're moving straight on. We're flying through these. Probably should take it a little bit easier, but man, already 40 minutes in. Time flies. Next up, we got the apples. Let's look at this Plague Tale fan art. I recognize that from a mile away because I got that on my ref board as well for my medieval city. So the apple started the production of the wooden trim sheet in 1K. Of course, no vertex blending at the moment. It's all good. I would like to know specifically how to make the ground. I can't figure out what I have to do to achieve a good level of detail with good optimization. And of course, feedback on what I already did. Yeah, I mean, I like the shapes that you have going on, right? It doesn't really feel too modular, so I kind of like that you just picked a corner and made it like really looking good. That's pretty cool. What you can actually push a little bit more is the disorganization of the buildings, right? Like currently what's happening is that they all follow along the same line. And you would probably want to break that up, right? And like the main line that I'm talking about is just where the building begins, right? Like it's all just on the same line. You kind of want to break that up a little bit, right? So that this building starts here instead. Or that this building kind of begins like a little bit, well, maybe a little bit higher up again. Right? Because those tiny things, they do make a lot of difference. Right? And I'm kind of just stealing that from here, right? Where you can kind of see that this building is kind of like sort of anchored on the beams of this building again. So there's kind of like a little dip. And then another dip again. So, yeah, it could be interesting. It also depends on the framework underneath, right? Because as you can see, I don't know how accurate they are with this, right? Probably not too accurate looking at this, but I think one of the reasons why they did it is because you have this beam going into that beam, right? So this beam goes into that one. But that means that it can't be at the same height as this one, because then the two beams would meet in the middle of that beam, which is not what you want, right? So that beam would actually remove all this stuff. So this beam would actually continue here. I mean, and there should be like a little space in between. And then this beam would probably go like underneath this one, right? So that you have like a stacking of beams that go through like another beam. So that they can't, like, you can't really get rid of it, right? I mean, it's a game, right? I kind of like being like pretty accurate with this stuff, but like thinking about the construction of things helps me a lot. Actually helps a lot, and it also sells the believability of those things that you're building as well, right? I mean, you can see that it's not really that big of a deal, right? Because like this doesn't really make that much sense in the grand scheme of things. Like sometimes it's a give or take, right? Like you don't want to be spending like all your time making it logical, but it can definitely make it look nicer, right? Like if this beam was higher and then this beam was like lower, and it kind of does the same thing, right? Like the same thing that we're trying to do with the buildings, where we push one higher than the other and it kind of has like this stacking effect. You can introduce the same thing with these beams as well that go into like the main frame. Just little simple tips like that. The framing itself looks really nice though. I like this stuff, right? Kind of in the same vein of what we're saying, is that one window is big, the other one is small. Like it kind of has like a very natural feel. So I really like what you're doing with that. Keep that up. Yeah, so now talking about your other question, right? Like you wanted to know how to approach the ground. There's actually, on the Bionics and Twitter, we actually recently retweeted like a good tweet from Martin Hoff, who talks about that, on like how to make like roads like very interesting. So I'll link to that again. Let me see if I can quickly find it. Also, if Twitter is still called Twitter, you know, like I don't know what to think about that at that point. Let's see. Yes, here we go. This is the tweet that I was talking about. Go check that out. It kind of breaks down like all the layering. Wait, why is it not showing though? Oh, was it just not loading? Okay. He does a great job. And he basically explains the same thing that I was gonna say, right? Like a lot of it can be achieved with flattable textures, right? So you want to start, let me do like a terrain breakdown, right? You would probably start with like the most common. Like what is the most common material that I see? Then create wait, I think there's a step in between. So the most common would be dirt, for example, right? Then I would say create something that creates like a little bit of contrast, right? We're talking about very big terms here, but let's say create contrast, which in this case would be grass, for example, right? And then step number 3 would be to create like variations. Especially for the dirt. Let's say dirt 02. And maybe mud, right? And then to add, like, this is almost like optional, right? Like, this is almost like the polish step, right? Where if you do this, you can add like little mounds or like little pieces of geometry. But you can do a lot with step 1, 2, 3 though. Don't underestimate like just having like really nice materials and blending between them, right? And having like a little bit of like a terrain deformation as well to kind of support it. It doesn't need to be much, but you can get away with a lot. So don't underestimate that. So I will, like, that's why like number 4 is kind of like a little bit of an extra one, right? Like if you want to be like very precise and you want to have close-up shots and all that kind of stuff, that's where number 4 comes in. But yeah, like I would say that like a lot of this stuff is just geometry that they had lying around, right? And then the rest of it is kind of just like flat textures. Like it's just like all the geometry and like all the stuff that they add on top of it that makes it look good, right? But that's stuff that they had lying around, like little pieces of wood, little stones, like all that kind of stuff. And if you had to create them, would you do it on Substance Designer from scratch? Depends on what you're most comfortable with. For me, it would be Substance Designer from scratch, yeah. I've kind of built up like a library of stuff where I can just pick from at this point, right? So I have like a couple of dirts, I have like a couple of grasses, I have like a bunch of atlases that I can just add on top of it. A good, in my personal opinion, like a good workshop on that was actually the workshop that we hosted with Derek Elshoff. Where he talked about like how to set that up with like different atlases and all that kind of stuff. Like that was really eye-opening to me. I'll see if I can share that one as well. Just need to get it real quick. Go. It's a little bit more of an advanced one, right? He goes through like a lot of techniques that he uses to make stuff really quickly. So it's not like a beginner tutorial, but it could still give you like some interesting insights on how to do stuff yourself as well. Very interesting. I learned a lot through that one. No worries. But yeah, that's how I would approach the terrain. And that's also like really optimized, right? Because you're not dealing with like any tessellation or height maps or anything like that, which you don't necessarily need. For example, I'll bring up an example that I have from myself again, right? Like this is for one of the weekly tips that I did. What do we have here? Like, I have the exact same thing that I actually just outlined, right? Like I have, oh, I actually have like the full, I still have them here. Hold up. So I'll actually show like a little bit of a breakdown for myself, right? So I start out with this, right? So this is just grass. And what I do is I paint like a grass material and it automatically spawns grass on it as well. Super simple to set up. And then I sculpt my path, right? I just paint like a different material, which is just dirt that has like a little bits of rock spawning on it. Then I'll do like a little bit of a sculpting pass. So you can kind of see that I'm elevating the edges of the terrain, just a little bit of the path. And then I'm moving the center of the path a little bit down to kind of simulate like people walking here regularly, right? And that's going to displace like some of the dirt. And then I also add in like little patches of mud to kind of indicate where they're walking. And then because there's so much mud, like the local people have started putting like boards on the ground as well to kind of help them navigate the mud easier than they would if there were no planks. And that creates like an interesting setup, right? Like That works pretty well. And this is without any fancy stuff, you know? Like, the mud just has a normal map on it. Like, no RVTs, like, runtime virtual textures or something like that. Am I blending the wooden boards with the ground? No. That's just like a generic... That's just like a generic dirt texture that I have on top of it. Well, it's kind of the same texture as on the floor, right? They kind of use the same thing, they just have a different material setup. They don't blend too well, right? So what you would have to do in that case is, like you said, maybe on the edges you would have like a vertex paint where you actually blend stuff in. But I didn't really get to that step. And also, it looks okay-ish, right? But that's also where these geometry things could come in, right? Like these bits of geometry that you could add on the edges that will give you like more geometric detail to kind of blend stuff together. That could definitely help here as well. But yeah, that's how I approach my terrain. I don't think I have other screenshots. Not necessarily. Don't think so. Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of other ones, right? Let's see. Can find like another good one. I don't think so. Not necessarily. Not for this example. Yeah, that's how I would do it. It's really good. Yeah, it works, right? Because you gotta be careful that you don't like don't want to go too perfect, right? When good is good enough. Because you're not focusing on like a little patch of dirt, right? You're making a full town. So while it might make sense for some person like in a production environment to really spend a lot of time on it, if you're making a town by yourself, like you'll have to... Not everything can be perfect. Yeah, cool. Thank you so much for sharing your work as well, the apples, and thank you so much for participating in like the first WIP Wednesday from your side, I think. So welcome, welcome. Great to have you here. Next up, we have a little update from Sheila. I don't think there's any... Wait, there is a little bit of generic feedback on anything that could be improved. Also for the lighting and tips on how to make mountains in the background. Oh, sorry, there was a little bit of feedback. Thanks to take some time of your time for me. Yeah, no worries. I'm here on a weekly basis, so feel free to post your work on a weekly basis if you want to. Yeah, so Sheila is looking for some generic feedback on anything that could be improved. There's nothing really that stands out immediately. Not necessarily. I mean, it's also like, I think you're on a good track with this, right? And I also know that you're busy with the team challenge as well. I mean, I see you sitting in like a team challenge voice chat right now, so yeah, I know you're busy with other stuff too. So I think I'm gonna keep it pretty light. Because I know that your gut is in like a good what is it? Like it points you in a good direction, right? Like I don't want to add too much to it. However, I will say tips on how to make the mountains in the background. That's something that I want to talk about a little bit then. There's multiple ways of doing it, right? Like you can kind of go in multiple directions as with anything in game dev. I'm gonna highlight a couple ones here. So how to make background mountains. So number one is the more manual way, right? Where you would sculpt in ZBrush, for example. Then you either have like the one way where you extrude that as a height map, import that into the terrain editor in Unreal, and then just texture it with like multiple landscape layers, right? Like with the landscape material. That some of them go pretty far. They have like automatic slope blending and all that kind of stuff built into it, so you can kind of try that. So terrain in Unreal, and then with the landscape material on top of it. That will be one way, right? You can also do this in Substance Designer as well, if you wanted to. But like the core of it also, it mostly comes down to either a height map. Maybe that's a better way of explaining it, right? Like, yeah, so option 1 is the height map approach. And then number 2 is a geometry approach. So like the height map would be something that you generate yourself, right? Like either, or I mean, you can use all kinds of data, right? Like there's world data as well, where you can take a snapshot of the earth, turn that into a height map, and then use that height map to make like an actual mountain in the engine. You can do that as well. But you can either sculpt, generate. Sculpt or generate this yourself, right? And then put it into Unreal and do the height map approach. Or you could actually just have it as like pure geometry, right? And at a certain point, like depending on which route you took, right? Like if you do like the height map approach where you have them inside of the engine based on a height map, or you just import them as like pure geometry. Like I would, especially for this one, throw all the logical stuff out of the window and just treat them as like separate islands. And then you can move and scale and rotate these around. So you can kind of build like a very flexible system for yourself. Just to have like one mountain that's kind of duplicated and scaled up and down and like made in such a way, right? And maybe you make like 2 of them, right? But yeah, that's like a very nice approach that I always take. So you could have like, if this is your scene, right? Let's say this is your little island that we're looking at right now. You could have like, I don't know, like a mountain here, like another mountain that's kind of overlapping with that one, like another mountain here. Another mountain here. You could kind of like enclose your stuff like with mountains. Right? You could build in layering as well. So this is our little camera that we're currently looking through. Cute little camera. And then you just have like these little mountain ranges that are kind of like just separate meshes in the back, because you're probably not going to see it anyway. Or if you can, like you can really easily obscure most of it, right? By just having like a larger terrain that kind of blocks anything. So that's the way that I would approach it. So mountains as separate meshes, that's the way that I would approach it. Whether it comes to these 2 workflows, right, like the height map or the pure geometry approach, I would potentially look at a height map first. I feel like height maps are a little bit more flexible. Yeah, so I would kind of like highlight this one. That's my personal opinion. I think geometry is quicker, right? Because people are more used to sculpting than it is to potentially generate height maps. But yeah, height maps just give you more flexibility. Like you can adjust them on the fly as well. And then once you have this, once you have this height map, right, and you converted that into an actual mountain in Unreal Engine, you can still sculpt on top of it, right? So if you say like, oh, I don't like this, I'm just gonna cut the top off of it and like re-sculpt it a little bit to make it look like a different one, you can still do that. You mean like Vista assets for mountains? Yep. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah, it looks so soft and fluffy. Yeah, the scene is coming along nicely. Oh, and then last thing, I'm not gonna give you like any technical feedback on lighting, right? Because that's also not really my best thing. Like I'm not really good at lighting. But what I will say about lighting is think about the mood that you want to set. That's the main thing that I usually think of, right? Like when I'm thinking about like lighting, how to light something or what kind of colors to use, like I usually try to link that as much to the mood as possible. So yeah, that's the way that I would approach it. So think about the mood and then think about like the colors that can influence that mood. That's how I would approach it. Yeah, for example, with one of my pieces, what I tried to do was I tried to invoke the feeling of, what is it? Like hope, right? So when I wanted to go for like a really hopeful mood, like I went for like a sunrise with like the golden glow in the morning, right? To kind of signal that they survived like another night. This was like in a post-apocalyptic setting as well. So that's the way that I think about it. Think about mood rather than lighting. Because right now, like if we look at the mood of this, right? Like it kind of has like a very serene kind of mood, right? Like it has like a very neutral, serene kind of mood at this point. So yeah, think about if that's what you're going for or not. Hey, thank you for subscribing, Ramstein. Yep. Cool stuff though, Sheila. It's really making some nice progress, especially with all the other stuff that you're doing at the moment. Keep up the great work. Aladdin is saying that he's liking the clouds in the background. I do too. But like I think Sheila is mainly worried about like these like edges. Right? And you'll need to do something about that. So yeah, either have like some rolling hills and then mountains in the background, right? That could be really cool. Yeah, something there would be nice. Or do the opposite, right? And like have it like really close and like cut off. Could be interesting as well. Okay, cool. Let's move on to Tariq. Thank you so much for posting your work, Tariq. I don't know if we've ever seen your work on here, but this is awesome. AJ is coming in, talking about Sheila's work still. Let's have a look. The level of ruin across the monument is amazing. The less clustered stonework being the more exposed to the elements and at greater risk of collapse. Very nice. Yeah, I like it. I like it a lot too. Perfect way to create a focal point at the center. It is, yeah. And then also the fabric, right? It does a great job of like pulling you in as well. Like a nice little additional thing. Great job. Okay, next up, Tariq. Making a Roman bathhouse. First project post-graduation. For WIP Wednesday, I'm looking for feedback on the design and the scale of the space. I think the space feels a little bit flat empty, but I think a lot of that feeling will be addressed as I increase the model and texture detail. Still, I want to make sure that I'm on the right track. I mean, you do have like a lot of interesting detail, but it's kind of just shoved into like little nooks and crannies, right? Like it's kind of hidden away. I don't know if that was typical in that time. I don't know enough about Roman bathhouses, you know? Let's have a quick look. Let's see if we can find some. Yeah, because, okay, first couple of images that I'm seeing. I'm kind of looking for. What's that in the back? Oh, it's kind of, sort of like a museum kind of thing, right? But like the thing that I'm thinking, I'm gonna just go with my gut, right? I don't actually know if that's the case. But like what I'm seeing here is that you have these pedestals, right? So that's probably where they would put like the prominent figures, right? Instead of doing the opposite where they were kind of like hidden in the back and like no one would really ever see them. It's kind of what my gut is telling me. Because yeah, those pedestals, like they are just too. What is that? Oh, well, yeah, this is from 1902. The statues are probably like in a museum somewhere, right? No. I mean, it's from Assassin's Creed Origins, but kind of see what I'm saying? Like they're in like very prominent positions where they're like the focal point, right? Like these sculptures, because they take such a long time to make. So I would expect them to be like on the most important places as well, right? Yeah, I don't think we're gonna find like any accurate ref, right? Because obviously like these statues have been around for ages. But this is where you would have to look at like almost like documentaries, right? Like people actually talking about it and like breaking it down and like historians talking about it too. Because you're gonna find like a lot of interesting advice whenever they talk about it. I do the same thing with my medieval scene as well, right? I base a lot of my stuff on the research that has been done for a fortification, not a fortification, but like a castle that they're currently building in France, right? It's like a replica that's like built in like the traditional ways, and they kind of build like a whole bunch of like resources around it. So I'm getting like a lot of good information there. Yeah, that's what I would do personally, right? So I would bring those statues forward. Like I would kind of have them in the same position as they do, right? Just have them here. Let them become like a more focal point, like a more important thing to the environment. That's what I would say. But you think the space feels a little bit flat and empty, but I think a lot of it will be addressed with the increase of model and texture density. I think so too. Also, keep in mind, right, like if you're trying to do like a recreation, or if you're trying to do like something authentic, because it has been, well, I guess now it's well known that a lot of it, we always perceive like Roman and Greek era sculptures and like iconography as just being like plain stone, right? Like just a plain stone that we kind of see here, but it actually was colored at some point. Right, so think about that too, because if you're gonna add like a lot of color to this environment, if you're gonna make like all these murals kind of painted in like a very authentic way, that's gonna add like a lot of textural detail and like a lot of interest to the environment as well. So that would be like a question that I'm gonna pose to you as well. So are these murals painted? Right, that's more like a question for you, like how do you want to approach it? And putting the statues forward, I think that's also a good thing to do. And there's also nothing bad with having like areas of rest either, right? Like I think this could be an awesome shot, especially if you simplify like all the walls here. Like let's say all these walls are kind of just, yeah, they're just flat, right? And then you have, I don't know, you have just like a couple of benches on the side, right? Like a couple of nicely crafted stonework benches. Could be very interesting. Because in that case, it almost becomes like an architectural visualization piece, right? Where it's more about like the actual space rather than making it like pure game stuff, right? You could maybe have like, I don't know. I know what you would have, right? Like some urns or something like that. Or amphoras, or however they call them, right? Kind of lining up the space. Maybe, like, try to imagine... I'll add this as a note, right? Like... But as a question. If I was a visitor here, like, what would I see? What would I see? What would I bring? And who would be here? Right, those are just some very simple questions, but they can indicate a lot, right? Like, because you could say like, okay, I'm visiting here. Like, what am I doing in this place, right? Okay, I'm chilling out. So I'm chilling out. I'm taking a bath, right? Like, what do I bring? Like, what is the tradition around taking baths? Like, who's gonna be there? Like, where do they leave their clothes? Like, where do they bring, like, I don't know, any towels, right? Like, what do Roman towels look like? Like that kind of stuff, right? It's all kind of stupid, but it will make the scene feel way more authentic if you add like those little bits into it. And I would honestly not even worry about like putting all the details in. Like just keep it to like really simple blockouts, right? No materials, just make it look interesting. Because for example, you could have, I don't know, one of the benches, right? Like two important people two important people from like the local council or whatever it's called, right? Like local states heads or whatever. Like they had a meeting here. Because I think that was also like the place where you would meet like other important figures, right? Like a Roman bathhouse. So yeah, maybe they had some wine here. Like maybe there's like a, I don't know, like a goblet. Maybe there's two goblets. Maybe there's like a towel that's kind of draped over the side. Right? And that's how these stories usually begin, right? Like trying to like indicate something, right? Are those statues missing heads? And Tarek is saying they're temporary statues. The statues from Quixel don't have a head. Yeah, I think a lot of them don't have heads anymore, right? Because that's probably like the most fragile part of it. Yeah, I would think about like what kind of story you want to tell, right? Because you have like a really nice set, like the scene is already set, right? I would have a look at like what story is that you want to convey, right? Like we kind of stumbled on like those screenshots from Assassin's Creed, right? I think I took like a whole bunch of them myself as well. So let me see if I can find them. And I also went to Greece, but I can't really remember. We didn't really visit like bathhouses specifically. Assassin's Creed Origins. Let's have a look. Let's see if I have some random screenshots from some of those spaces. Don't. Well, it's Origins, right? It's more pyramid, like Egyptian stuff, right? So it's kind of off the mark. You had another one, but I don't have any pictures there. Damn. Okay, I thought I took some pictures from. I don't even remember the name. The other Assassin's Creed game. Doesn't matter. But yeah, I think part of it is also like you're saying, right, Tariq, is that you think that a lot of it will be addressed as you increase the model and texture detail, and I 100% agree with that too. I think once you start like really carving the pillars and like making the stone material and like adding variation, like I think this stuff is gonna look really nice. Sometimes having it simple is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It just, the thing that you need to be careful of there is that the stuff that you do add needs to look top notch, right? Because people have less visual noise to look at, if that makes sense. Does that make sense so far, Tariq? Feel free to ask any questions as well, by the way. Like if anything is unclear, or I don't know, if I'm kind of rushing through, feel free to stop me, right? I like the idea of converting the side area to more of a lounge area. Yeah, like I'll also say that the reason why I thought about a lounge area is just because I think that's how they were set up, right? But I don't know that for sure, right? So that's why I gravitated towards that first. But maybe the side areas like served a completely different purpose, right? I don't really have an idea, gotta be honest. But I'm sure there will be like documentaries on like Roman bathhouses, like on YouTube. So yeah, I think the one that always comes up is literally from, yeah, it's a place in the UK called Bath, I think, which is like famous for this one. A cool one as well. It was Origins? Just didn't take like any pictures then. Any of it. Yeah. Yeah, a lot of research, right? Like if you wanna make it look good, you'll have to do like a lot of research to kind of, and with research I mean like digging up like the little interesting things that not a lot of people are aware of, but that you can infuse your environment with, right? Like that's where the juicy stuff is for environment art. AJ is also saying that Assassin's Creed Brotherhood was also set in Rome in the 1490s, but I don't remember there being a bathhouse featured. But there are similar spaces. Yeah, I was confused a little bit. Like, Origins also has like a bunch of those places, right? Not specifically bathhouses. Although, no, there are bathhouses. I just never took pictures of them, I think. So that might be an interesting one to look at. Because if I can remember correctly, like they had a lot of, I don't know what the significance of this is, right? But they had like lots of flower petals and like lots of, yeah, I think they had cauldrons with like flowers in them, and you would see them like scattered around the bathhouse. Maybe that's like an old technique to make the bathhouse smell really good, right? Because soap, I have no idea. Soap widely available? I don't think so, right? At that point, but there must be another way where they kind of infuse that. And also the reason why I kind of look at Assassin's Creed in that way and kind of lean on it a bit more, and I'm confident in leaning on it a bit more, is because they work together with like actual historians to get this stuff like really correct. Obviously, not everything is going to be 100%, right? Because it's still a game, so take that into account. But yeah, there's probably like very interesting things that have like way more significance than we think about it. Like the flower petals, for example, that I came up with right now. Yeah. Rajav Sharma is saying, I found a post on ArtStation. Yep. Yeah, there's probably like a bunch of them. The Bathhouse of Alexandria. Let's have a look. I should actually allow for links to be posted. Alexandria. Oh, again with an M? Oh. This looks awesome. But I just get so triggered by like the anti-aliasing of all these pictures. Yeah, this looks cool. I mean, yeah, look at this, right? Like how prominent those statues are in like these shots. This is pretty much what you're working with as well, right? Like this is awesome. And then there's like a bunch of tables set up on the side to like provide guests with like refreshments if they wanted to, right? So it's interesting, right? Because in this case, I think those tables and those refreshments, they kind of serve two purposes, right? Like one is to actually tell a little bit of story, right? But it actually also has like a very good secondary effect by making the space feel absolutely huge. Because those tables, like those tables that we see down there, That's actually something that we can relate to as humans, right? And then we look at the pillar next to it, and it looks absolutely massive. So it actually does a really great job of indicating like the scale of the space, which is awesome. Stuff looks so cool. Great job. Yeah, cool. Thank you to Rick for sharing. I hope that helped. Let me last thing I do is I'll share that little artwork as well. I don't know if you have it already, but share it with everyone. Here we go. Thanks for the feedback. No worries. Next up. Oh yeah, sorry, Tariq. No worries. Thank you so much for posting again. Appreciate that. And then next up we have Senkai. Senkai just started a block out for my diploma project. I'm setting up a space station. Idu goes. Hi everyone. I'm assuming that you're Senkai then? Or is the timing just really on spot there? Setting up a space station, so I decided to create a sci-fi hallway and then later turn it into like a sort of cargo bay. For this project, I made it my main goal to learn ZBrush and shaders in Unreal. I want to make the whole environment with one trim sheet using the mid-poly workflow. Okay, interesting. Some props like the big containers and some animated steroids in space I thought to make unique. Oh, sorry, Edu. Sorry to confuse you. Hi, Senkai. Welcome to the chat, Edu. How are you doing? Yeah, so some props like the big containers and some animated asteroids in space I thought to make unique. I wanted to make the overall scene to be dark and creepy and the environment to be grungy and dirty. Maybe towards the end I will add some tire tracks and bloodstains for storytelling. Some main questions and concerns I have for this project. I have exactly 1 month to finish the whole environment. Okay. Okay. So, tight timeline. I see. That means I need to try to not overscope and manage my time wisely. What would you suggest I prioritize more on? So, if you only have 1 month, because that's a really short amount of time. Really short. That's gonna fly past. Oh, just made this one red. Don't want to do that. Let's start there. So, one month. A couple of tips here. So, find a concept. I know that you started blocking out this, and I know that you shared like a lighting ref as well, but I would say like either find a concept or find like designs that you're not going to change. Right? Because the reason why I bring this up is you don't want to do any designing as you're doing this because you only have 1 month. So you need to do as much of production work and making stuff look good rather than trying to design actual things, right? So that would be number 1. Find a concept or designs. Very important. Number 2, one camera. One camera only. Pick one camera and make that more interesting than having 2. So right now, it's up to you, right? Like which one you want to take, but I would only focus on the one. Like what I'll say is if you're trying to sell that it's like a cargo space, right? You can do, what would I say? Like this one is more interesting. So So the focus here of this one is a cargo area, right? So you can do a lot of interesting stuff with like making it look like an actual cargo area, like having like decals on the floor, having the containers be nice, like maybe add like smaller boxes, make the door look really interesting, right? Like really focus on like the cargo area and kind of ignore the windows, or you kind of go the opposite route and cargo becomes like a secondary thing, right? So in this screenshot that we're looking at right now, the cargo is definitely something like more of a background element. Doesn't mean that it's not in the picture, right? But the focus is definitely going to be on the exterior rather than the interior, right? So yeah, I would say pick one camera point only. And let's say at the end you still have like, I don't think this is gonna happen, right? But let's say you still have 2 weeks left, then maybe you could make a second camera shot, right? So yeah. And then I think last point here is modularity and reuse. But honestly, like I would already check this off if you're gonna stick with the mid-poly workflow. I think you're good there, right? So this one is already checked off to me. So that would be good. So because you also asked like what should I prioritize more on, right? Is prioritize on what would make like an interesting focal point, right? So for me, like this door could be like an interesting focal point where you could do like a little bit of storytelling. Like you could have it like the lights flicker, like the door partially open or like malfunction, and I don't know, something happened with that, right? And then with like the tire tracks, the blood decals, all that kind of stuff that you were talking about, you can do something interesting. Whereas if you do that in this shot, I mean, you could kind of still do it, right? But then it's kind of going to lead off into this direction, probably. And I don't know if that would be so effective as having it with like a door that's kind of malfunctioning, if that makes sense. So what you should prioritize on is kind of more on the story that you want to tell and how you're going to get there. So I would actually add this as like an extra thing. Story. Because the story is going to depict what scene would be better for that story. Right? Like if you, for example, if we have the whole like, I don't know, let's go very stereotypical, right? Like alien or like you're like alien invading the spaceship, right? Like this scene would be the best one for that. However, if you're just trying to do like an accident with like the cargo space, and I don't know, someone got crushed because like a container kind of flew against like this guy, and this guy is kind of crushed against the wall now, right? Could also be an interesting story, but then this one would work better. So yeah. Because 1 month is really short. So again, like try to focus on the story. Find as much designs or concepts that you can really stick to, right? To just focus on the production. One camera only, and then try to texture everything with like mid-poly workflow. Let's see, because you have a couple of other questions as well. How can I make the scene interesting and make sense? I'm unsure of the blockout stage. I made many iterations, but don't know if the environment looks interesting enough. Currently, the question comes to mind how the containers are unloaded onto supposed cargo space. I thought about making a crane system and making the ceiling higher, but I don't know if I'll have enough time for that. Yeah, no, like, so this second topic, right? Like, how do I make the space more interesting? Number 2. interest, question mark, is, again, story. Like, what's the story here, right? Super important. Because what you brought up there, like, how do they unload cargo from this space onto the main deck or whatever it is, right? That's also important, but it's a different kind of importance, right? Like, storytelling is something that happened to a person or to the location itself. Whereas what you're trying to lay out is logic, like scene logic. Like how do these things transport from one place to another? And honestly, you can do like very simple stuff with that, right? Like, if you don't want to make a crane system, just indicate that that this door opens, but that you have like a truck come in, and then this truck picks up like the containers, right? So that means that these barriers are probably gonna go. I would probably remove them anyway, right? These containers are probably just strapped to the floor somehow, right? Like you can look at, like, I think military planes, they kind of have the same sort of setup where they're hooked into the floor. And that means that once like a truck comes in, like they undo the belts and then they put it on the truck and then they kind of go back to where they come from, right? And all you need to do there is just indicate, like, you would have decals, right? Like you would have a decal that kind of what is it? You would just have these lines, right? Where you indicate that, oh, this is like a space where people can walk, right? But then you have like caution vehicle, right? To indicate that if a person is walking here, and let's say there's like a staircase for it to make sense as well, that people can come up and down this side. So that means that people can walk here, right? But there's like caution tape all over this space. And you can do a lot. Like this doesn't really take that much time, right? Because it's all just text and decals, but you can indicate like a whole bunch of story with it, right? Like you can, like, this just lets me know that, like, oh, vehicles drive here. Cool. Add some tire tracks, right? Like, okay, cool. Yeah, makes sense. Vehicles are driving here. Awesome. And then you see this door, and it kind of makes sense that this door is going to open up because that's where the vehicles come in. You can kind of add some signals here. Maybe there's like, I don't know, some lights or something. You're also saying makes sense. I thought about designing and concepting everything before. No, 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 nope, nope. Especially not with a month. Like, you're not gonna get there. I guarantee that. It's not gonna work. So try to really keep it simple. Look at games, right, like Dead Space. Look at the shapes that they use and just try to replicate it as much as you can. And then add your own spin on it, right? Like this stuff, like that's kind of enough to make it stand on its own 2 feet. But yeah, you don't have time in a month. It's not gonna happen. So yeah, that's like how I would lay out the logic of it. But yeah, like, think about what happened here, right? Like, that's the story, and then start building up on that. So it's like, what do we write here? So, story first. Story first, right? And then number 2 is add logic. And this can be done in like a very cheap way, right? Like the decals that I just brought up, like that is probably going to take you no time to get them set up and textured and all that stuff. And then once you have it set up, you can just reuse them all over the scene and start really set dressing. It's going to look nice. And then, let's see. maybe what props would you recommend to add if I do have the time? I mean, that's going to depend on what story and what kind of logic you're trying to set up, right? Because right now, your scene feels like a template, right? It kind of has like basic functionality, but for me, like, let's say if you have a story that revolves around like an alien, right? Or if you have a story that revolves around like the containers being pushed around, like that's gonna completely push the props that you need in a different direction, right? So I can't tell you that at this point. Like, I want to know what the story is first before I can give you like any recommendations on props, right? So that's why do these two things first, and then my advice would be focus on props that are relevant to the story. Because that's where your focal point is going to be, right? If you're going to do something around the door, you need to you're probably going to know that you want to put more time into the door rather than something else. If you're going to do something with the containers, you're probably going to have to put more time on the containers and maybe some of them open, maybe stuff spilled out, right? Like, it depends on that. So, story first. And then focus on the props that are relevant to that story. That's the way that I would approach it. Definitely an alien. Well, then you'll have to think about what kind of alien, right? Think about that and then start building something around it. And then for the logic, that's a little bit more detached, right? Like, you could have, I don't know, if I want to give you like a couple of prop suggestions, right? Like, prop suggestions for logic, right? For like world logic. Fence. Pipes, cables, etc. Like panels. Right, you have a pretty good ref there with Dead Space. Like, they have a lot of paneling on the floor. That is, you have to take into account, that is a corridor where people walk through, right? So your paneling is going to look completely different towards the paneling that they have. So your panels are probably going to be bigger, right? Because your panels are going to have trucks riding over them. Like, the main thing there is not about like the amount of props that you necessarily add, right? But like, how do you make a difference between the space where people walk and like the trucks drive, right? Like, they will have like a visual language that is different. With the decals and all that stuff we talked about before, right? That's also an example. Yeah. And then the third question here is, how would I go about working with weighted normals, and are they necessary at all? I'm working with Maya, and most information I found on them was from different modeling software. Oh, let's have a look here. We got some people in the chat. Sorry. Adding a vehicular route could also be a good way to lead the viewer's eye around the space, like a line of motion. Yeah. Yeah. The viewer's eye. Did Alien Isolation have any loading docks? I don't know. I've never played the game. Couldn't be bothered playing against an alien. Benno is also saying, or maybe adding a smaller door next to the giant door, because it would have to open the huge door for people, maybe? Heard that somewhere. So that's actually an interesting one. When I worked in factories, what they oftentimes did is they would have like a smaller door embedded into the bigger door. Like you could do something like that. That's actually an interesting idea. Right? Like make it look maybe a little bit more interesting than just a standard door. But like the large door could still like swing open. But then if you didn't want to wait on like this large door to go open, like you could still like just go in here if you wanted to. That's a great suggestion. Oh, AJ is saying that later on in the game, you can find somewhat spacious areas for docking small vehicles. Interesting. Could be an interesting ref to look at. But back to your question though, how to go about working with weighted normals and if they are necessary at all. Yeah, weighted normals, they just clean up the way that your bevels look. So, how do I... Man, like the only way that I can really visualize this, it is not... It's not really gonna be pretty, right? So, like, normally what happens is when you're doing average normals, right? Like, and your normals indicate like how your model is going to be shaded, right? So let's say we have a prop with one bevel here. Like we just have the one edge and then it goes to like another side panel. What usually happens with average normals is that they're just going to be the average of the two sides that are next to it, right? And it's going to do the same thing here. But what that is going to do, let's say this is a full cube, it's going to make the cube look rounded. Because if we look at a whole cube, let's say the top side, right? Is that they're never going to be like fully aligned with a surface. So what is actually going to happen is that it's going to try to bridge these two vertex normals and it's going to make the top face look rounded. But what weighted normals do is they put them perpendicular towards that big surface. So instead of the rounding happening all around the box, the rounding is only going to happen in between these two. And because these are pointing upwards, like they're just going to be flat. Right? So that's why you need weighted normals. Because it's really drastically going to impact like how bevels look compared to flat surfaces. So that's why you need them. But yes, you do need them. So this is average and this is weighted. And the difference is huge. So yeah, for this stuff, you definitely need weighted. Yep. How you need to work with them. Usually it's literally just like a tick box. And I think even in Maya, there's probably like a weighted normal like thing that you can just tick and it does it for you. I think every software has it. But that's all it does. Like it will literally just change the shading of your model to be more consistent. And that's it. And then what you have to do with this workflow is add trim sheets or decals on top of it to make it look interesting, right? Like look at Alien Isolation, look at Star Citizen. Like there's enough examples now. But that's the way that you would apply them. I see, but can it be substituted with extra geometry? I guess, but there's also no reason to. I guess you can, to a certain degree, right? Like, what you're basically going to be doing you would have to add like a lot of geometry, right? So let's say we look at this example and we have the exact same example, right? But with what you're saying, wait, hold up. So let's say instead of having this one edge, what we do have is, let's say we have two edges, right? So what's going to happen is that the vertex normals are... Wait, hold up. Let me pick a different color. So these were our vertex normals before. Like the average ones, right? Then if we take a blue and let's say we add like another in between, what it's going to do, it's going to push the vertex normals closer, but they're not going to be perfect. You see what I'm saying? So you're lessening the effect of the shading looking wrong, but it's not going to be perfect. So there is going to be a moment when you add so much geometry that you can't really see like anything anymore, right? Like you can't really see the vertex normals rounding off the other stuff. But at that point, if you can do it with like a simple shading trick, then why not do it, right? Because that would just be like a waste of geometry at that point. Because even though geometry is getting cheaper to render, right? Like if the difference between like all your bevels in your entire game is either you do one bevel or you have to do 5, like that is gonna tank performance if you do that on a scale, right? Because let's say you're making like complex ships like Star Citizen and they have like, I don't know, let's assume they probably have more, but let's assume that they have 1 bevel on everything, right? And now they change that to 5 on everything. I mean, the impact of that is going to be enormous, right? Because it's not only like straight bevels, but it's also going to affect like the connecting bevels, right? So it's going to like exponentially like increase the poly count. So you could, but why should you? That's the question. Or you shouldn't. Let's just say it that, right? Like you shouldn't if you're using weighted normals. So yeah, that was number 3. Yeah. I would say good luck, Senkai. I wish you the best, because making something like this in a month, it's not easy. But if there's anything that we can help with, just let us know. And, I'll be here every week, so feel free to share more pieces as you go along, or ask any questions. And thank you for posting your work as well. Good luck with the environment. And we're gonna move on to Jesse. Gotcha. Thank you so much for the feedback. No worries. Happy to help. AJ is asking, hope this isn't too off topic, but are weighted normals something you would use on any kind of mesh on characters as well? No. No, I don't think on characters. Like, weighted normals are usually something that you would use on sci-fi meshes, because they usually have a very clean topology, right? So let's say for example you use weighted normals on a rock. The topology is going to be all over the place, that the shading is going to look off regardless. But like the benefit with like clean sci-fi looks is that you have like usually like bigger flat surfaces, and then you have like a bevel, like a transition into like another flat surface, right? So it usually lends itself really well to like tech. So Dead Space, I think Dead Space uses it, or I think they do, or like the Callisto Protocol, one of the two. Star Citizen uses it, Doom uses it as well. But those are like, you can see where this goes, right? Like all of them have the consistent like industrial tech sci-fi look. So it lends itself really well to that kind of stuff, but not necessarily characters. No worries. Jesse, we're back. Let's have a look. Got an update. So decided to add an element of murder to the camp narrative. I want daytime to look innocent. I think teen wood camps, mischief in the 70s. Nighttime comes, search party looking for the two duos, flashlight. Yeah. Okay, cool. Decided to go with that idea. With the tent being lit from the inside with a silhouette of one of the campers with a knife. Oh. Wait, what? How does that make sense, Jesse? Wait, so let me read that again. Let me make sure if that makes sense, right? Because at nighttime, there's a search party that's looking for the duo, with the tent being lit from the inside with a silhouette of one of the campers with a knife, right? So, because you're saying that the kids were playing in daytime, and then you switch to nighttime, and then one of the kids has a knife? But there's already a search party on the way? Right? This doesn't really make sense to me. I think it would be... Let's think. Oh, solid point. So I think what you could do is actually what you have on your last image, right? Where your you have the image of like it's kind of the sun is going down, right? But you can still see some stuff, and then you have like the tent being lit up, and you see just two silhouettes of kids playing in there. Because I think that's just like a really nice visual idea, so I like it. And then you switch to the night where like the tent is kind of like ripped apart or something like that, or the tent is open. Or maybe just cut open or ripped apart or something. And then you have the search party looking for them. Right? So then you can still do your cool visual shot where you can kind of have the tent being lit up from the inside. And then once it's night, you can still have it like slightly lit up, but like the tent is all like ripped apart, right? By the person like ambushing them. That's the way that I would probably play that, right? Oh my god, that's a good idea. I did want to keep the cool lighting aspect between day and night. Yeah, I knew that, right? Because I think you have like good ideas here. And that's also why I think it could still be good to have like, I mean, just like your concept here, right? I'll bring it up for other people as well. Oh, or maybe not. Oh no, here we go. Right, so the concept in the back, right? Where like the sun is already like partially setting, but you still get like all the nice purples and blues, and like maybe you can have the sun a little bit higher so that you still get like some of the orange. And then switch to like full night and have like the flashlights in the back and all that stuff. Narrative has been kicking my butt on this project. Got a lot of cool ideas I wanted to throw together. Yeah, sometimes with this kind of stuff, there's a saying, right? KISS, like keep it simple. I mean, some people add like double S on there, like keep it simple, stupid. But that's more of like a personal taste, right? You don't necessarily need to add that last one. But yeah, so sometimes keeping it simple is gonna be more than enough, right? Like you don't need to add like all the components and show off like all the things in one place. Like just focus on one thing and make it stand out. And in this case, what I'm talking about is just having like the juxtaposition between, oh, kids playing, having a great time, and then flip a switch, nighttime, search party, right? That's all you need. So yeah, I think that's the main thing that I can add here. Of the color scheme, hell yeah. So we have day. The day is just focused on like kids / fun, right? And then night is yeah, like search party. And like horror, right? Let's call it horror for like dread. So you have like the main component are the kids, right? And then the mood is fun. And then in the second part, the main party is the main component is a search party, with the mood being like horror or dread, right? Or spooky. Yeah, that's also a great way of saying it. Oh yeah, also, more of technical stuff, right? There were a couple of things that I wanted to bring up. It's interesting what you're doing here with the foreground element. I think it's just too much. Like, it's too much of a foreground element. And also, like, it's not dynamic enough, right? Like, if you have a tree that kind of does something like this, might be interesting as a foreground element, but this is like equal with the frame, so it kind of feels like very forced and weird. Yeah, I mean, that's a simple fix, right? Or yeah, just move it a little bit, like angle it like a little bit. I was thinking of being a shot climbed by a camper, but it does look quite off. Yeah, I thought that was what you were trying. I think maybe I can add branches to break up the log. You could. I mean, try it, right? It could be like a really nice shot. What you could also do is maybe have I mean, it depends on who we're talking about, right? Is this like a kid that's taking the pictures, or is this the guy coming in and like disrupting the scene? Because it depends on who we're talking about, right? Because like you could add like a creepy factor to it, but like a guy looking through the bushes, right? You could have that like very creepy angle. But if this is just like, this could also be just a picture of like the kids already setting up camp or something like that, right? That could also be interesting. Depends on what you want to tell, right? Like, maybe it could also be cool to have like a sequence of events, right? Where like it could almost be like, oh my god, how would we say this? Like, we're here. And you could have this like written on the picture in like marker or something like that. And then you could have like, oh, setting up camp. Maybe the tent is flat at that point. Maybe you could even get away with like just folding the mesh up, right? So that you don't have to do like any retexturing or something like that. Setting up, and then we're set up, and then you have yeah, I mean, it's gonna break apart a little bit, right? Because if I was thinking about like, we're here, so you see them arriving with the bike, then you have like setting up where they're setting up the tent, but it's still flat or like half set up. then the tent fully set up, then them inside of the tent, like playing like with the tent lit up, and then the switch, right? But then, I mean, it's kind of weird, right? Because then you're also indicating that they're taking pictures. I mean, yeah. I mean, you can overthink this stuff so easily, right? I was gonna say, like, if you're doing that, then they're also taking pictures from whenever they were kidnapped, right? Because that's gonna be one of the Polaroids. Or, oh man, you know what you could do? So you have, because you're working with this interesting idea of having like a film reel, right? So what you could potentially do is have the first 4 ones like coming from the film reel of the kids, and then have the last shot being like a camera shot from like the police. So it has like a different camera overlay, maybe it's already a digital one or something like that. And then you just call it like, I don't know, crime scene evidence, right? So you play around with the framing of the whole picture as well. Maybe be an interesting one. It's up to you, right? Just spitballing ideas here. So yeah, then the sequence would be something like arrival, setting up, a lot of hard work, right? And that's when the tent is a lot of work. That's when the tent is fully set up. What'd you call it? Like playtime, when you see them like in the tent, like just playing games or whatever, with like, I don't know, shadow casting on like the sides of the tent. And then kidnapping, right? Man, kind of feels sad that this needs to be here, right? So yeah, and then all this stuff would be taken by the kids, right? And then this would be like evidence pictures. It is very dark, God bless. Yeah. I mean, look, honestly, like if you want to keep it wholesome, just cut out this one and you got like a wholesome scene. I'd imagine they can just be very quirky teens gone wrong, spare the kids. Yeah. But yeah, you could, right? But that becomes more difficult to convey, right? Like, why would they just leave their tent? I don't know. I mean, if you're working with these... Well, no. I mean, look, I'm gonna throw like another suggestion, right? So like playtime, so that's when they're in the tent, and then maybe you could have like another scene here where it's like first person from the kid, like holding a flashlight, just looking in the woods, and then just like, am I lost? Then that goes into search party, right? Like not necessarily kidnapping then. Yeah, like maybe they spot something spooky, like you could have like another frame in between these two, right? Like, what was that? Then, I don't know, you see them running or something. I mean, there's options here, right? Like you can keep it like very simple, because again, like it goes back to an earlier point, right? Like we can kind of like keep adding to this as much as we want, but sometimes simpler is better, right? Because what I do like, even though, well, what I do like about like just this setup, right, where we don't have like all this stuff, is that it is really simple and effective, and the last part of it like kind of leaves you shocked. Right? There's almost like no explanation of like, whoa, what happened? What? But it depends on what you want to do, right? Because it could also be cool to add like a little bit more story and have them like lose their way in the forest or something like that as well. It could be interesting. It's up to you. I like what you did, by the way, with the film reel. I like that. Cool little presentation going on there. I love it. Yeah, I would say that this stuff is more onto you, right? Let me see, because you actually asked some feedback, right? So I'm looking for feedback on the campsite so far and what I could add to make the narrative more apparent. Okay, we kind of talked about that. Plus, if the new film overlay looks film enough, or should I tone down some of the colors / grain, trying to replicate the Kodak picture film reel feel with ratio and colors? Yeah, no, I think that works, man. Like, I think this stuff really works. I think the only thing, and I don't know, like I've been debating saying this for like a long while, right? But I'll just throw it on there and you'll see what you can do with that. Is that if you have this film reel, they're usually like semi-transparent, right? So maybe that could be a cool thing to include here, so that you can see like parts of the table or the wood underneath. But obviously that's gonna make the whole picture feel more confused, right? Because you're gonna reduce the contrast on the picture itself. So I don't know, it might not be a good idea, right? Maybe it just, this is where you make like a creative decision rather than going with like the realistic approach of things, right? It could be interesting to try it out and then see if it works or not. But yeah, again, that's up to you. And also try to see, again, smaller thing, but like try to see if you can blend these two values together, right? Like the gray and like the black. Small thing, but look freaking awesome. Yeah, man, but I like the presentation. Very unique, you know? I like it. Antonio coming in. Hey, boss. Heyo, how are you doing? You can add one picture that's just motion blurred, like they were hastily trying to snap a pic into something while running away. That's actually a very good idea. That's actually like a very, very effective and cheap way of indicating panic, right? That's great. I like that. Also, we got a random question here. What do you feel? What do you think? Do you feel if you use ready-made assets in your personal project, do you feel that is more fraud of lack of achievement? Nope. Has nothing to do with that. It just indicates that you don't want to spend your time on something that you're not really ready for or good at. Right? But like it's not gonna be like a bad mark, you know? Like let's say if you have your environment and you make the focal point yourself, but you don't make any of the foliage, then you just indicate that you don't want to make foliage. But that doesn't leave a bad mark, in my opinion. Yeah. I'm doing good, Antonio. Thank you. Yeah. Great stuff though, Jesse. Thank you for sharing this again. I like this. And then I think we got the last one here. Got the last one here. Mr. G. The look of the renders, the fine details on the sword, how to make the render stand out. I think the one with the matte is looking a little flat. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do the oxidization on the crossbar. Is it mostly in the albedo of the sword, or should I adjust the roughness as well? Whoa, okay. A lot of questions here. I feel like, honestly, we talked about a lot of that stuff before, though. Right? And then Jono came in and gave some really, really good advice. Let's see, how to make the render stand out. I mean, you're doing a pretty good thing with the matte, right? That's kind of unique. I do feel like it's not necessarily relevant. Like, the matte almost feels like more of like a hobby matte rather than an actual blacksmith craftsman matte, right? Like, this is not something that I would see like in a, I don't know, like at a blacksmith forge. That's what you're going for, right? Like, I don't know. But we talked about some ideas on how to make it stand out last time as well. So, because I remember that we were talking about price tags and something like that. So, yeah. Don't want to spend too much time on that, honestly. I'm also trying to find out the best way to do the oxidization on the crossbar. Oh, on this? Yeah, I mean, like this assembly section. Yeah, like these pieces, right? Like all this stuff, like internally. Yeah, I mean, that just comes down to adding like another layer to it, right? Like making an oxidization material. Just really looking at like reference for like oxidized metals and how they would look like internally. But you probably don't have too much of it, right? Like, I think I like what you're doing here. Like with this kind of stuff. Like indicating... Well, where does that go? Right, so that goes into the crossguard here. But this almost... Like what this felt like to me was like almost like some sort of glue. Like glue residue. Kind of what it felt like to me. Like, yeah, the oxidization... Yeah, don't really have too much to add on that. What I will say, though, is that this stuff, like, now that you disassembled it, right? You're putting a lot of attention to, like, these edges, and they don't have a bevel or, like, any baked information on them. That's not really doing them justice now. Right, so that's missing geo or bake. Like, that was never an issue because it was just like already assembled, right? But now that you pull them apart, like that's where you're highlighting, like putting more attention to. Yeah, the detail's not there. Yeah, exactly. It's mostly the albedo of the sword, or should I adjust the roughness as well? Yeah, I think what you can do, like for the oxidization again, right, is do, because right now there's like you said, not enough variation in the roughness here. Like it almost feels like it's like either full on or just full off. Like it's either black and white. But it probably has more to do with like a lot of subtle stuff happening here, right? Like you would have these items that you have now, right? But then you would also have like transitional stuff between it, right? Where it's like in the weird place between like metalness and not. Yeah, that's how I would approach it. But yeah, I'm not sure about the matte, right? Because I don't know. Like especially compared to the black. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on here, right? Like the matte is asking a lot of attention. And also like if you have the matte, then I would expect like a different lighting setup to happen as well. Because now you have the matte, but the lighting setup is still like studio lighting, right? And we talked about that previously as well, I think. Where the shadows and like the stuff being cast are like studio, but then the rest of the scene is kind of like, oh, this is my hobby room, right? So it kind of feels like the two of them are conflicting. And I don't think it's even helping like how the roughness on the metal looks necessarily. Because, I mean, studio lighting is black and white, right? So, yeah. That would be something that I would give a try as well. Because it's not only like the roughness values, right, that make a difference, but it's also how the lighting will reflect them and like catch them as well. So you're always balancing the two systems, right? Than only looking at the one thing. But I gotta say, like I like these renders, you know? I think I said it last time as well. Like this render with the depth of fields looking really nice. And in here, the studio lighting works because the scene is kind of black and white, right? So it kind of has that like lean studio feel to it compared to this one. Yeah, I mean, the best thing that I can say on the oxidization part again, or as well, rather, is just looking at a bunch of ref, right? I think I'm not an oxidization expert by any means myself, so I would have to look at a lot of ref as well. So yeah, keep digging, find the good stuff, try to go on like really nerdy sword blogs and try to find like how people disassemble them and how that looks and all that. Yeah, get nerdy. That's what I would say. I was planning on adding the tanks to the one with the mat. So the reason why I don't really like that is, again, like the mat kind of makes it feel like hobby, right? Like this is like an arts and craft mat that you're adding it on. Yeah, it has like it's a cutting mat, right? So this is like a hobby and crafts kind of thing. And then if you were to add like the price tag or something like that to it, then I mean, we're trying to simplify the narrative a little bit, right? Like to make it really clear that, oh, this sword is up for sale, or like this is just like a hobbyist trying to repair a sword. Like that could also be like an interesting story to tell, right? More of a crafting table, exactly. Yeah. That's how it currently feels, right? Because like the only setting that I've seen those cutting mats in is like in a crafting setting. Which again, you get to choose, right? Like it's up to you. Like if you want to go with the whole crafting angle, then maybe having like, what would it be? Like sanding paper. Maybe like a little bit of sanding paper, or like varnish, like a little like what is it? Like a little pot. A little, how do you say that? Like a little drum of like varnish. or like a little bit of like contact glue or something like that, right? To indicate that this person is like trying to repair this sword. Thinking more of a label versus a price tag. Yeah, but then what's the label for? I was thinking of adding those items. Okay, yeah, if you're gonna add those items, that's good. Yeah. No, I see. Yeah, not a price tag, but a label. Yeah. That's good. If you're going that route, 100% agree. Ignore all the stuff that I said before. I thought that the label was supposed to be like a price tag kind of thing. That's my bad. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I do like that angle. That sounds awesome. And then you could, okay, we're gonna then take it one step further, right? Because you have the disassembled one, right? Where this guy's hobby is to disassemble parts, like disassemble swords and like put them together in like an authentic way, or like as a hobby or whatever, right? And then if you then have screenshots of the thing putting together, like the one on the right, you could maybe do something where, think about it in a way where you would be the person making this. Like, how would you display it, right? Like the first thing that comes to mind is maybe like a glass display case, right? Like an open glass display case or something like that, like hanging on the wall, or like one of those like wooden frames, right, where you can have like the sword hanging on top of. There's some cool stuff, right? Some cool stuff that you can do with it. And then maybe, oh man, I'm thinking, my brain is spinning right now, because I'm thinking like it would be cool to have a wall. Maybe you could do is, if Megascans or like Quixel Megascans has swords as well, what you could do is have like a little display where your sword is like the main focal point, but you have like these other swords like kind of just out of frame to kind of indicate that this is like a wall full of swords. Could be an interesting approach. I mean, it's more like set dressing at that point, right? So, I don't know. It'd be interesting. It also doesn't have to be that, right? Like, you could also have on, like, another piece of fabric, like the fully assembled sword again. Maybe a glass box in a museum. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of interesting things. And Aladdin is saying that he likes the Damascus steel wavy patterns. Yeah, they're looking sweet. Yeah, lots of things that you can do with storytelling for sure. But that's awesome though that you're going for the hobby route. Awesome. Sounds good. Okay, I'm looking forward to see where this goes then. Now that there's no confusion about like selling it or like a hobby and craft kind of thing. That's awesome. Yeah, looking forward to seeing more updates on this then. Nice. Okay, yeah. Wait, let me make sure. So yeah, we kind of did talk about like how to make the render stand out, right? Like if you add like all the little assets that we talked about before, right? There's so much cool stuff that you can do with that. Like little bits of like spilled glue or like little cuts in the cutting mat, right? Like so that you can really see that this is a cutting mat of like a guy who's been doing this for like years and years, right? Like just little bits of storytelling can do a lot there. Yeah. Something out of Forged in Fire from the History channel. There's a lot of cool ideas there if you're going for the hobbyist route. Never watched it myself, but I heard people talk about it. Yeah, could be interesting. Yeah. Good luck, Mr. G. Good luck. Have these details. We'll update soon. Awesome. Maybe I would have a look on Megascans, right? Maybe, I don't know if they have this, but maybe they have some little trinkets that you can easily just put on your scene to make it more detailed. I don't know. Thanks. No worries. Thank you as well for posting your work. It's nice to see these updates. Thank you so much for putting it up. Looking forward to the next one. Yeah, and we've been going for pretty long, 2 hours and 40 minutes. So it's time for me to skedaddle. So I'm gonna be going. Thanks so much for being here all. I know this was a long one. I appreciate you all sitting in, listening to like all the tips, pitching good tips yourself as well. Thank you so much for doing that. And thank you for everyone posting your work. Like, it's really awesome to see like all the progression of all the people week to week. And if this was your first live stream here, go check out some other stuff that we have on our YouTube channel, on our website as well. If you want to become a member, you can find the link in the description as well to become a member of our community. And yeah. Oh, Aladdin, you're going to be posting for the first time in WIP this week? Hell yeah, looking forward to it. Talk about it next week then. Okay, thanks everyone. I wish you all a nice day or night and stay creative. Bye-bye.